and welcome. My name is Yusuf Serunkuma and welcome to the Editor House Facility Publishers. I am joined by Leo Zeilig. Leo Zeilig is from London, perhaps one of the most prolific authors I've met in my life, a Marxist, a radical Marxist scholar, writer, who's done books on so many radical topics. And Leo has a new book which is coming out, The Winter Circus. How do you feel about the book, Leo?
Very excited. Yeah. Always a little bit nervous when a new book comes out, but I've never written anything like this. Yeah. This is a personal story, and I feel incredibly close to the topic.
You know, I read the book and I fell in love with it. I'll tell you that it's a memoir, but I'm curious about the title of the book, The Winter Circus. And there's a Lenin quote, and I hope you tie into the Lenin quote of Traveling Circus. But why the title, The Winter Circus?
Well, the Winter Circus is an actual place. Yeah. So it exists in Paris. Yeah. And it's all year round, but it comes to life in the winter. Yeah. And the winters, of course, in Europe last a very long time. It's a miserable place to be. Yeah. So the Winter Circus is real, but it also denotes an idea of a place of imagination and creation. Yeah. And that's the role that it takes in the story.
Would you tie into Lenin's Traveling Circus? It seems to me that there's a connection between Lenin and
well,
and the book.
Lenin wrote, and I use the quote in the book, and we've discussed it. Yeah. The Lenin quote says, "We mustn't have overly pure notions of what a revolution is. You know, the revolution is going to be led by a variety of social forces and in different places." And then at the end of his quote, I have added, who knows, maybe the revolution would be led by a traveling circus. Yeah. But it seems to fit to the story and to Lenin, the spirit of Lenin's attitude about revolution.
You know, to a degree, I felt the idea is noble that, you know, you're waiting for a pure circus led by radicals on the street, but then travelers coming from some place, coming to play a circus may actually end up causing revolution. Okay. I think it's a beautiful line that you added. Yeah. I'm curious to know, you know, as you read the book, one realizes you're building a story around 4 friends of yours. You know, is this a movement that you actually build, a movement which I guess is to fit into radical ideas, Marxist ideas? Is this a movement that you thought about? These 4 friends should be my permanent friends, and we could build a movement together.
Yes, I mean, I think that's a strong part of it. And these are 4 friends who are, in a sense, the travelers in the story. Yeah. They come to a city that is not theirs. They find out during the course of a weekend together that there are major events taking place of which they must participate because the world is falling apart. So they gradually commit themselves. They're already committed as a group of friends, but it's about the journey towards their full and final commitment in life. Yeah. At a certain point, these are men in their late 40s and 50s.
You realize in the book that it's a friendship that you try to keep together. How do you manage that? Because oftentimes friendships fall apart. Distance and things, but over the course of your life, it looks like you've kept them together.
Well, these are close political friends, you know, but they're also intimate personal friends as well. You know, that of course they were drawn together at a certain point in their friendship because of big political events, but they have kept together because they've helped each other survive the vicissitudes of any life.
And it seems to me that in your friendship, you're all obsessed with the idea of a critique of capital. Not just a critique, but a radical takedown of capitalism. What in your assessment, you know, I mean, we'll get later into the sort of the radical ideas you come up with, but what are the big crimes of capitalism that you seem to be, and as one of your readers from Eddie the Kid, The World Turned Upside Down, the theme is a critique of capitalism, a radical takedown. Why is this? Yeah, it looks like we live in a capitalist modernity. Why is this?
Well, it's interesting because I publish nonfiction, so I also publish history books, which are all anti-capitalist, which all look at emancipatory, revolutionary movements that have taken place in recent history. However, in fiction, and as you point out, in all of the fiction that I've written, I talk about the struggles, great and small, of activists, of groups of friends like the ones in the Winter Circus. And doing that in fiction is very unusual. It doesn't exist really, and having these friends and these characters who are resolutely on the revolutionary left.
Is this what fiction enables you to do? What you can write in nonfiction piece of work, you're able to have these radical ideas blossom.
Exactly. Well, I think that's exactly it. I think my fiction comes out of a frustration. Yeah. And it's a frustration which has cut out the experience, the intimacy, the life, the struggle of individuals in capitalist societies in our nonfiction work. So fiction was my attempt to tell the full human story of life that we're so often badly taught to leave out of the other writing that we do and the other ways of living that we do.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that really struck me powerfully, and I think this is within your other writings too, is that you seem to suggest that capitalism, the response to capitalism has to be a violent response. What do you think about that?
I think all revolutions require force, and that's not original to me. Yeah. It's hard to see a successful revolution taking place which doesn't present itself as a counter-hegemonic and counter-violence to the state and to imperialism.
Is that an embrace of violence in your view, which borders on being an anarchist?
Well, I would probably say instead of violence, that it is a revolutionary mass movement, and that the greater the scale and success of a revolution, the less violent it is. So I don't think violence is an important conversation to have, and I don't want to glorify it or separate it from revolutionary struggle, but suddenly it is an important issue to grapple with.
But you seem uncomfortable with order because, the characters you create embrace sort of an anarchic world where they do things on their own. They go underground. They disappear from where they could be monitored by the state. Is this an embrace of anarchism to a degree?
I think that's a really good question. I think partly expresses a frustration internationally with socialist and revolutionary politics and the failure of mass movements over the last 40 or 50 years. And we all live that failure, wherever you are in the world. And so I suppose, and you're drawing attention to it, Yusuf, that the violence that you speak about in my writing is the expression of the frustration with the old, slow means of building that have not led to successful revolutionary struggles or sustained political and social revolution.
So do you mean to a degree that then the response to the slow means of revolutionary struggle is a full embrace of violence? And I'm going to ask you later, because in your books there's a lot of gore. People gouging out the other's eyes, martial artists, bouncing into CEOs of corporations and taking them down in the streets of London, in sort of Paris or London. And I'm curious, this embrace of gore and violence, is that your sense of response to the slower way in which movements build up? So you're frustrated with the slowness. So you're going, open, all out,
in the other direction.
Go, right?
Yeah, I think you're on the money. I would say that there's a great writer now, tragically no longer with us, called Mark Fisher, who says it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism. So I think it expresses a general feeling of frustration at the disappearance or the frustration of political alternatives to the world. So to some extent, the work represents that. And it's also on large and small scales, the sort of acts that I describe will be required. I mean, already taking place, as we know. The rise of the far right and the fascists in different parts of the world do require confrontation. And that confrontation has to be with as large a movement as possible, but it will also be on the streets.
It strikes me that there are two strings of revolutionaries you paint in the Winter Circus. There's the voluntary, single, individual struggles where people take on the struggles individually, but they try to build a movement. Is this an embrace of the everyday forms of struggle where individual people have to do work on their part and say, I'm not going to wait for other people to join me, but I'll do it? Is that something you...
Yes. But of course, the key thing, which is my own political training, and we can make a fetish of it, but maybe it's not a bad fetish, is organization. Without basic revolutionary and political organization, the steam of mass struggle or of even individual frustration that I describe in the books disperses. So even though there are individual acts in the books that I've written, there is also the nucleus of organization that can group together some sort of anti-capitalist alternative into a fighting force.
Wait. It then becomes confusing to me, because in one of the beautiful chapters, which is going underground, is you disappear from the world as we know it. You go offline, you get rid of your credit cards. And so how do you organize after going offline? And I'm going to ask you, how did you manage going offline? No credit cards, no visas, no online imprint. How did you manage that?
Well, like all things that I write, it's an exaggeration of life.
Yeah.
So you take a seed of a frustration and you expand it, you grow it. So all of us, I think, feel that these tools that we're told will liberate us and will help us succeed in life, our phones, our computers, become tools for our enslavement.
Yeah. And then you decide, I'm going to get rid of all of this in my life.
And so then liberation comes in part from breaking free. But what would that breaking free involve? What would it look like? How would you disappear? Not just because you want to disappear and fight the anti-capitalist fight, but maybe you want to disappear to find some sanity and some peace.
But you seem to know that's not your suggestion. You seem to suggest that once you go offline, then you're free from the capture, say, by the banks and telecoms and online being easily visible. So beyond not really the quest for sanity, but disappearing from sort of the entrapment of...
Yes.
Is that...
Well, we
how torture could that be? Well, how torturous was that to you, doing that? Isn't that so torturous?
Well, we know people who've tried it, and it's been extremely difficult. I detail in the Winter Circus how it could be done and why it might need to be done. So if you were seeking to escape the massive surveillance of society, the extraordinary capacity of the state, the neoliberal state, to find you no matter where you are, monitor your thought, organize your life, how would you break that in order to, in the case of the story, in case of the memoir, to join up with other people who are beginning to formulate new plans and new projects for another world?
I really like the idea of going offline because, being online is very torturous. I can tell you that. And also, it mentally, also in terms of time, it's very torturous. But is it possible, as you suggest, as you try to live it, is it possible to be unable to buy things online? Is it possible to be unable to travel with a visa? Is it possible to live this kind of life like you're back in the 1800? Is that possible? And do you think a revolution has to go to that extreme?
I would say, any revolutionary here would probably say it isn't what we should aim for. We need to be connected in order to make a revolution. And if you look at the revolutions that have broken out, successful and unsuccessful, over the last 20 years, for example, they have been to some extent facilitated by connection.
Yeah, but then going offline kills the connection because online.
But you have to understand in this book, I'm playing with an idea.
Yeah,
and that is, how do we break from a technology that has enslaved us? Mm-hmm. So it is a creative play on how we would free ourselves from something that we've told, that we have to, spend enormous monies to acquire. But then once we've acquired it, in most ordinary life, chains us to one place, forces us to do what we're told, one way or the other, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's the Instagram, social media world, that keeps us fundamentally in our place.
And I'm glad you talk about ordinary life. I think we need to switch gears a little bit here. For revolutionaries, still life is ordinary, right? You have normal things to deal with. And I see you map out, the struggles of your friends as ordinary individuals. Still, they have these big ideas of liberating the world, but they still have family, personal struggles. How do you manage to juggle between these grand ideas of serving the world on the one hand, and then your personal?
For me, that is the ABC of revolution and revolutionaries. That we're not just heroic Iron Lenins. We are broken human beings. And tragically, in socialist organizations and those that I've been a member of, bearing those foibles, and those hugely complex relationships are frowned upon, that it is not something that you can freely emit. And so partly the story expresses men, perhaps, and their tragic masculinity, their friendship, which is both beautiful and strong, but also hides a great deal as well. And most of our lives are made up, not with the grand narrative, not with the revolutionary struggle, but by the separations, the heartbreak, the affairs, the disputes in the family, the financial issues. And fiction, for me, has to tell that story.
And I see quite a couple of your friends are quite lonely in this story. They're hit by loneliness.
A pandemic of loneliness.
Don't you see loneliness as a scare to sort of these grand struggles activists tend to be involved in? Marxist, anti-capitalist fighters. Loneliness seems to be a major threat to their lives.
Yeah.
Because, if you go offline, for example, you can get lonely real quickly because, you can't do WhatsApp, you can't connect via X, you get lonely, right? And it seems to me that you have, on the one hand, a movement which espouses the idea of first do personal disciplining on your own terms. But then on the other hand, you're going to get lonely. How do you suggest that?
Well, I mean, isn't that the paradox of our connection? We created a world of multiple connections, permanent connections where it's impossible to be offline because somehow you're subhuman if you are. Yeah. And we've spoken recently about friends of ours who've turned off their phone for 5 days, which almost seems in itself like a revolutionary act.
Yeah.
Is that an act of loneliness? Is that an act of separation? Should that trigger our alarm bells about their mental health? But what seems key to me is that despite these multiple layers of connection, we remain acutely alone. And the loneliness, perhaps the modern phenomena of loneliness, speaks of this heightened moment of connection as well, of online connection.
I want to ask you on this, how many friends have really tumultuous affairs? Do you have a big laugh when you're with your friends and talk about these affairs and relations, which go bad? And there's plenty of sex, a lot of sex in your book.
Some of it was edited out as well.
It was a lot of sex in your book. And I'm just curious, do you have a big laugh when you meet and discuss these things?
I think that's a large part of their connection. And, this point in their lives, and these are 4 friends who are meeting and they're all in their late 40s and early 50s, who are coming to some sort of crossroads. And they, those crossroads frequently in a human life will be either the failure of a long-term relationship or a marriage that they're in, or that they're a dissatisfaction with their intimate connection that for some reason is frustrating to them in some ways.
They seem promiscuous too. It strikes me that these heroes tend to be promiscuous at the same time.
Well, in some cases they are, and certainly not all. And maybe it's a promiscuity that emerges from
loneliness,
but also from a deep unhappiness about being forced into certain types of relationships, and then the enormous social pressure at staying in those relationships. The dysfunction of those long-term relationships, no sense that you can get out of them.
Okay. I said when we come back from the break, I'll ask you about the part where you suggest people should learn martial arts, because you come off as an expert. Let's come back after this break. I'm still with Leo Zeilig, the author of an upcoming book with Editor House Facility, The Winter Circus. It's a beautiful book. I love the cover. It's an amazing book. I read it. And in this book, you could see Leo is struggling to spell out an agenda which he engaged with his four friends on how to respond to the ruins of capitalism. And among other things, he suggests that, people have to learn martial arts. How good are you at martial arts?
I was once reasonably good, but a long time ago. And it formed a huge part of my thinking as a young man. I was active in it. It wasn't, of course, as anyone will tell you, far better than me, who've dedicated their lives to martial art training. It is not just combat. It is also a way of living and a way of thinking.
I like the idea that you want the individual to learn combat, but it borders on criminal behavior when you learn combat and you start taking out people in the streets. It sounds so criminal to me. Do you think that's the right way to deal with capitalism?
No, maybe not. But in the book, it's a part of it's an random acts of violence. They're organized squads of anti-fascists who are taking out the far greater threat of a rising racist and fascist threat. So they would see themselves not as individual fighters, not as heroes, not as butch revolutionaries, but as people who are fighting to break the spirit.
But no, wait. They take pride in the number of kills, in the number of broken bones, in the number of eyes taken out.
No, I would
that's very gruesome.
No, I think that's a misreading. I think it's the opposite. I think the listing of injuries in the book, which certainly does take place, is a listing of the hurt they have caused to individuals. So it's quite the opposite.
But they seem to take pride in it.
Not pride.
And I think it's be criminal behavior under normal state. Because you're going to excite some young people who are really tired of and frustrated with capitalism. They'll be doing the things and they'll say, we learned this from...
I hope the book will inspire people to join movements and organizations
to learn combat, go offline, become minimalists.
If they want to, that is certainly an option for them. But no, it is about combination. It is about breaking those feelings of loneliness that we spoke before the break through joining with other people and through organization. Combat obviously plays a role, but even that combat is organized, highly organized. And in fact, when Louis in the story, when in the memoir, when he talks about fighting and all the injuries and the hurt that he's caused, lists them, it's because it weighs on him. So when you inflict violence, you carry that with you. That is, it's an idea of Franz
It seems to me
Fanon.
they are happy with the success they've made. They have reached so far in this, because these are not injuries against ordinary people. These are like CEOs of big companies and, major corporations. They're not mourning. They're not under the pain of having caused these injuries. But
Yusuf, you're referring to my previous novel, which was The World Turns Upside Down. And there is a movement which was taking out not even CEOs, the super rich.
Yeah.
Who employ the CEOs.
Now you forget, part of that is your life. Part of it is in the Winter Circus.
Oh, well, there's always a combination. And how do we separate what's in our life and what's in our fiction?
Exactly.
But I'm happy with that combination.
I'm curious about this sort of the anarchic picture that you paint of the world. It seems to me that we're in this apocalyptic world where we are fighting, super rich CEOs of major corporations. We need to take them out openly in the streets.
Okay, there's wishful thinking, and so I'm projecting partly a movement which is global. So I see the Winter Circus partly, as it's promoted as a manifesto, an anti-capitalist manifesto for taking on a global capitalist system.
Yeah.
And that fight, as Lenin tells us, is going to involve a whole multitude of different struggles, some that we'll like and join and others that we won't. So I see it really in all of that complexity. Yeah. Does that movement exist? No. Does the anarchy you talk about exist? Absolutely. But it's the anarchy of the other side. Yeah. It's the anarchy of a world which is driving us increasingly to war.
Tell me about your friend Patrice, the character Patrice. she seems to be, sort of a unifying figure at some point, but also she seems to be unreal. She disappears. She shows up and she disappears. Tell me about her character.
Red. You're thinking of the character Red in the book, or Rachel.
Yeah.
So she's referred to by various names. Yeah. She makes an appearance. We all recognize her.
And then disappears.
Well, we recognize her. Yeah. All of us, we're not quite sure where we saw her. Maybe it was sometime in the early 1990s. Yeah. Some of us think it was Rachel. Some think it was Irene. We don't know quite where she appeared in our lives. And then suddenly she appears on this weekend.
Exactly, yeah.
And she appears with a lesson for my friends and for me. And she orders, she's the person who directs us to the Winter Circus. And it's the Winter Circus, literally the place where the change right at the end of the memoir comes. And
she seems later to bring out the other four friends together, the other three friends together. As we get into the dispersal, looks like you're mobilizing around her character.
Yes. She is, I suppose, the MC. The master is in any circus, there has to be someone who takes charge of the circus ring, who commands the action, who brings the trapeze artist on, who tells the animal trainer to come and commands the lions. So in a sense, she's the organizer of this movement, but she's also in the memoir, the organizer of us, of the four friends.
Yeah, exactly.
And she sees their crisis. She sees the crossroads. She sees where they've come to and the impasse in their lives, in all of our lives. And unlike, there isn't, unfortunately, this character in most of our lives, but she also directs them towards, points them towards a new path, a way of breaking from their present.
I mean, one of the things that I found really fascinating is that, in painting the cruelty that capitalism has done to the Western world, you draw imagery, you draw inspiration from the African continent. You are impressed by how growing up in the African wild looks like, and you seem to suggest that's the dream. It should be the post-capitalistic world look like the life in the African wild. Is that? You seem to suggest that.
I would never say it so romantically as that. There's a character in the book who certainly does say it.
Yeah.
I will leave it for the readers to find out who that is.
Yeah.
However, what I'm trying to do in every single thing, every word that I put down on paper is to say Africa is not marginal to global political developments. It is at the center of them. Yeah. And then we need to turn our focus to those developments and those transformations on the continent. So in the Winter Circus, the center of political action is Africa. Yeah. And the revolution, the global revolution that takes place, spreads from a base in the Casamance, which is in the south of Senegal, led by a particular group of revolutionaries across West Africa, and then the rest of the continent, and then, and only then, to Europe, waking the sleeping beauty of the global north.
But I realize to a degree there's sort of romance with the African countryside. There's a bit of embrace. So you cite these African theorists who are anti, the ways in which Africa is painted as poor. And you seem to embrace this kind of descriptions to the degree that that's how...
Yeah. No, I think there's something profound about that.
Yeah.
And I think that, Africa, which is frequently painted as the most broken and most impoverished continent, has, of course, as we know, on a global scale, the greatest riches. But also there's a richness in the lives that people live in different parts of the continent, which does not exist anywhere in Europe. And I do draw attention to that. And I do say how those ways of life could show us a way forward, could present us with some sort of non-monetary, non-capitalist future.
And, I see on the cover of the book, there is an endorsement from Professor Isa Shivji. He's amazing. He must be a friend, I guess. You are connected to very serious people on the African continent.
Well, I mean, I'm humbled by his endorsement for the book. He was a big fan of The World Turned Upside Down, my previous novel. And he agreed to write an endorsement for this, which he liked. He related to the anti-capitalism in it. But of course, Shivji is a giant, a man that I have learned an enormous amount about. So for him to be on the cover and for him to endorse the book means a great deal to me.
Well, what would you say to readers who will be fascinated by the cover? It's a beautiful cover. What would you say to readers who feel like picking the book to read about a particular circus, thinking you are part of the circus, but only to find that these are radical ideas? How would you say to readers like that?
I would say that fundamentally, this is a story about their lives as well. Yeah. So we have to see our own struggles, which we think are private and remote, and often is where we're most tortured in life and where our mental health suffers and breaks down. So to see this book as their companion, and to see the struggle of the men in this book, literally the personal upheavals as theirs as well, men and women. But to see the politics as offering a way out, an answer.
So Leo, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, your readers see a radical streak, a communist radical streak. Where does this come from?
I grew up in a political household. So I had the advantage in many respects. I had a fairly difficult father, but I had a political father who had grown up as a communist himself, a Stalinist, and that rubbed off on me. But also I became political at the time, as we know from the story, at the time that those communist regimes, those state capitalist regimes were collapsing. So I was a very different type of communist.
So what makes you, first of all, it's so radical when I say it. As you know, I've said to my friends that I have a friend, and this is the most radical anti-capitalist person I've met. Where does this sort of radical, bordering on extremist anti-capitalist positions come from? Were they as radical as that?
Well, I would argue that my politics is in fact the politics of moderation, that we live under a system of extremism, of genocide, of mass killing. This book was written during one of the most recent and horrific genocides in Palestine, as we know, in the last few years. How can you not emerge from that with rage and anger in your heart?
But even before that, when you write in The World Turned Upside Down, you're very radical. Your key core character is a murderer.
Well, that's not clear in the book. So I would dispute that. She's an organizer of revolutionary forces, and that those are forces that are taking place and kicking ass against corporations and an elite who run the world in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and in Europe. So she's very clear that the target is global capitalism.
I mean, and on that, I'll ask again. You know, as Africans, we tend to see the Western world as so persuaded by the idea of capitalism, you know, as being the future. How did you escape this sort of enchantment with capitalist ideas?
Well, it's a good question. And when I was becoming political from the background that I've just described in the late 80s and early 90s, capitalism was triumphant.
Yeah, exactly.
We were told that there was no alternative. This was the slogan of the political class.
This is the end of history.
It was the end of history, Fukuyama's end of history. So, but it was against that, and it was countering that I formed my politics. But also I have to say it was by following and participating at a minor level in the anti-apartheid struggles, which were also to some extent anti-capitalist in South Africa, and the huge mass movements that swept the continent in the early 1990s. So history has ended, we're told, yet people are rising up and changing their governments. And organizing society for themselves, country after country. And that took place here on this continent.
And I asked you earlier, but if you look at the success of capitalism, across the sort of the global south, as they call it, is a violent success. It's not success of ideas. It's victory at the battlefield. Do you see yourself as a responder, as trapped in this dialectic, an eye for an eye? You win your battle through violence. Perhaps the response has to be violent. Do you see yourself in that tradition?
I see myself in the tradition of the mass self-emancipation of working people and the poor. And that is a politics that has always been present in the world, but in Africa in particular. But it has barely seen the light of day. So it has emerged again and again. It has been on the streets. It has fought in its own name, but it has always been defeated. So the question for revolutionary movements in Africa is, why have the struggles that have taken place over the last 60 years gone down to defeat? It is not because they haven't existed, but it's because they've been broken. And also because the mobilizing politics of them has been so problematic.
Why is that? Do you think the mobilizing politics has been met by a more corrosive force in capitalism, or it's because of the individual discipline of the strugglers?
I think it's a whole combination of things.
Because what appears in the Winter Circus is that, you have to organize at a personal level and at a collective. Do you think that's been the failure of these mass movements?
Well, I think one of the greatest struggles of all mass movements and all revolutions is sustaining mobilization. So what happens after State House is stormed, or in Burkina Faso in 2014, when the masses were on the streets and the parliament, the National Assembly, was ransacked? How do you maintain that popular energy for transformation, which will have elements of destruction in it, into a project for social and revolutionary transformation? So for me, that is the crux of the issue. Creating that.
The book doesn't end in victory. I'm just curious to know, is a memoir outside of the book, where are these people now? The book ends. What are they doing? Are they still in the struggle?
It ends in possibility.
Yeah.
So the dispersal, which you indicated earlier, is the dispersal after this transformative weekend to different aspects of liberation. So one of my main friends in the book goes off to fight in this army for the new world. Another joins this traveling circus or theater troupe that goes to play to bring culture and theater and drama to the new world, or to those areas of liberated lands that are beginning to break out across the world.
Was that deliberate, that you guys see theater as part of the struggle?
I think theater's always played a transformative role in both political struggle and separate from it. I mean, if you look at the great Senegalese filmmaker, Semben Ousmane, he turned to cinema, and cinema for him was not going into a dark studio and watching a film, but it was taking radical films of history and showing them in rural areas to working people and to poor communities. So theatre and art as a instrument of transformation.
I want to ask at a personal level, have you tried art? Did you try on any of the genres, be it drama, music, film? Have you tried those?
One of my great frustrations is, and I suppose I'm a failed actor, but one of my great moments was being cast in a play in Nigeria, in Lagos, for a traveling part of a traveling theater, almost across Nigeria, and playing a minor part of a colonial official, as it turns out.
Oh, you were the colonial official.
I was the colonial official. Unfortunately,
how do you feel about that?
I have the burden of having a white skin, so the roles that I could take were limited.
I just have one more question for you. This book comes across as a memoir, right? And one of the things we struggle with in memoir writing is the amount of truth that authors are willing to tell their readers about their personal struggles and lives. So how much truth are we should we expect in this memoir? Because you're not a very old man. I'm sure you're still making your life. But how much were you willing to tell us in this memoir?
I want to tantalize you with the reality that this book is 100% fiction and 100% non-fiction. And I want to leave that challenge to the reader to work out. Yes, did the events in this book take place? Some of them did. Was it in that order? Were they concentrated on a single weekend? Maybe not. And do those people exist? Are they my friends? Yes. Are they exactly like they appear in my memoir? No, not exactly.
Yeah.
So the creation,
you make them appear the way you want them to be.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And also you concentrate characteristics to tell a story.
Is that not unfair to the reader that you create, supposedly major lifestyle lives out of different lives? Is that disingenuous to your readers?
To some extent, but there's elements of this story and perhaps all fiction or previous fiction that I've written of the fantastical, and the fantastical, which is definitely present in there, which allows the reader to see the artifice, the creation, is important because it's a vehicle for us to explore alternatives.
Okay.
And to show possibilities. You're right. It doesn't end in victory, but it ends in possibility, Yusuf.
Yeah.
And we need that possibility, the hope of those possibilities.
I should tell you, your readers are going to, try to live your life. It's a very beautiful life. You go offline, you delete every single online footprint. You try as much as you could to get rid of it, right? That's revolutionary. And kudos that you're able to do that. And I think some people are going to try and do that. I'm sure many of your readers are going to try and learn martial arts, because it looks to me that you spell out that this new movement of anti-capitalist struggle, martial arts is the future.
Well, there's certainly elements that can be learned, but like any reader of any book, there are parts that you accept and take and learn from, and there's others that you jettison. So that's what I hope the readers will do.
We're shooting this right from the heartland of Uganda, which is Kampala. Thank you so much for visiting Uganda. Thank you so much for working with Editor House Facility. And once again, congrats about the book.
Pleasure.
I think it's going to be a hit. It's going to be a hit for not just African readers, but I think for European readers too. And one more time, congrats.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you so much for coming to the show.